So you were going to initiate like to our dialogue continuing from the last.
Well, I mean, I was, but to honor what you were saying, in total confession, even leading up until this getting together, for the most part, I am losing my mind.
And that's okay, because when we were spontaneously speaking, you know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a sense of woulda, coulda, shoulda. I remember there was something about woulda, coulda, shoulda. Had I known what I know now, I would have done something differently, because I comprehend something of the. I mean, there's life maturity. There's years of seeing it from multiple perspectives to the point of comprehending something much deeper. But I think the essence of what we were speaking about was this divine indifference in Beloved's case, that he was really allowing himself to abide in, as for lack of a better word. I get the sense that he wanted to be able to allow himself to abide in it in 1986, but there wasn't enough that was actually taking on the responsibility for the musculature required to have real instrumentality at the level of the gathering. So he had to continue to submit for those next 14 years. And then he just wasn't able to after Lopez. And there was something about that I came into conjunction with in his company, where I never saw anything but divine indifference. I never witnessed anything other than that quality characteristic. So when I hear Leelas of him intervening prior to that time, for me, it would have been a sign and a symbol of what that is and what that looks like and what that feels like. I already know for a fact that he did submit even to allow me to come into his company. I wasn't prepared to be there. I wasn't responsible for what I was intuiting and what I was responding to, which he was responding to in me, but I wasn't fully responsible for it at the level of the body. So when you said earlier, there's these senses of like I couldn't make that up. It took 2 years to adapt to a truly raw diet that did show real signs. It took me time to integrate even one line of his instruction. It's a matter of your responsibility, my brother's circumstance. It took me time. That has fully accomplished itself by his grace, with the help of so much grace and so much divine intervention along the way, but a lot of tapas, a lot of sadhana, a lot of being in the body to take care of the musculature required to establish a divine domain in which I can both practice and allow those things to be accomplished. So understanding what it took just to accomplish one line of instruction that he gave to me, and then to come, full circle to additional forms of instruction that he gave relative to spiritual signs or the lack thereof, or reflecting to me that what I was describing was true of him, but not true of me, because I'm noticing it in him and I'm so combined with him by virtue of proximity. And what does that say about me or even others that are potentially taking on qualities and characteristics that are true of him, but not necessarily true of themselves?
Really important.
So all of those types of liabilities, all of those types of understanding, and then what is it that really does allow for the fullest maturity, wherein I'm actually truly capable of locating him, regardless of any kind of dependence on any form of proximity? Is it possible in a bar, in a YMCA? Is it does it happen? My confession is it does happen. And I'm not doing it, but have I participated in a process to a point where that is noticeable? Yes.
Yeah.
So with that said, I mean, all of these years later, I wish I had the strength then that I have now in terms of the conductivity and the discrimination for me to be able to have shown greater signs of being able to be in his company and make a difference in the ways that he was expecting and wanting me to.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
Exactly. I feelingly understand and completely sympathetically coincide with that, because I do feel that similarly. I remember him saying that it would be better if I could continue to live and actually enjoy, in lack of better language, the fruits of my labor, and be living with a true renunciate culture. And he said that there was no one surrounding him with that capability, that he was isolated and alone. So that's a heart wound, that where coulda, woulda, shoulda. I wish I could have provided him with that. And a lot of that was carried along with the notion that, oh, if only I could have maintained my emotional sexual intimacy with him, as if that had anything to do with it.
Yeah.
No.
Don't we know? Nope.
No, it didn't. But, being a gross persona born in Southern California, a complete sex addict, that was something I had to deal with. And he was gracious enough and enabled a process of growth without growing for you to understand that. And that was difficult. And I have no regrets about any of that process with him. At times, did I kick and scream and have to experience dreadfully painful moments and dark night of the soul and everything else, and question everything? Absolutely, because you have to be able to comprehend it all, so that it can be observed, understood, and transcended without recoil in relationship to it. So these rules that are superimposed on the process of reality consideration are absolutely counterproductive.
Not useful.
No.
No, they're not really that different than a swastika, in the sense of they're encoding into something that's that's something that's inherently meaningless. They're putting meaning into it. They're associating it with beloved. I'm not really sure that that's fruitful for the sake of his work. If anything, it is a stave in the wheel. It's creating an interference in the process.
Precisely what he described it as. Yeah. The culminating lesson is refusing to be embraced as a gift of liberation. It's like when Beloved said to me, the problem with you is that you take my criticism personally.
Right.
So no, the ego does that. Devotee does not. So he can be as fierce as required, and it can be as scathing as necessary, and it can be really dark.
Yes.
Or it can be really high in illusions of grandeur. The spectrum of possibilities is irrelevant in terms of what needs to be observed, understood, and transcended. But the dramatization of it that becomes the stave in the wheel is not okay.
Right.
And that's what we're dealing with at present, is that warring dichotomy relative to profound paradoxes that are being dramatized that justify the ego act, like a justification that, oh, we don't exist, or he asserts and he denies. You can't know. All of these kinds of profundities that he spoke about, all of it, as you indicated. It's all addressed. If you study, like if you really allow yourself to be available to study according to what is necessary for your process in direct relationship to him, rather than having it being dictated at you,
right,
relative to what you should or shouldn't listen to, what you can or cannot say, who you should or should not relate to. You can't go out in the world. The world is evil. Be isolated in the inner temple, and the inner temple and the outer temple is different. And it reminds me of him also saying, do not make overly much of the distinct functional distinctions between the orders and the congregations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it should be in the back matter that describes. Don't replace my teaching with all sorts of other works.
Mm-hmm.
So the truth, I absolutely trust the illuminating self-illuminating process that will make these errors obvious, and then what is being enacted will inevitably fail. It will.
Yeah.
Because there are also too many people, and even all of us are dramatizing various errors, inevitably, until there's the perfect process and practice that we can acknowledge culturally as being authenticated. These errors will fail, and until we actually choose to open our hearts in the vulnerable process of this reality, spontaneously prior unity reality process with one another, we will only keep that stay really steadfast, and the motion will keep perpetuating the ego act and dramatization. And that's why the mission isn't succeeding.
Right.
Because the people are not stupid. This is one thing I really learned by the little Buddha. Thin as on a grain of rice, that it's like, people are not stupid.
No.
They will recognize when the demonstration is true and real. And that's when the mission will flourish.
Well, not to mention that beloved, when he was addressing someone, he wasn't addressing all the presumptions that person had about themselves, or the presumptions other people had about that person, or the fictional what have you, that person was potentially, liable to identify with at any moment in time. He was addressing that deepest inclination that's actually the case in every single being, inherently, implicitly, always already the case. That capability for recognizing what is always already the case, that is not separate.
Yeah.
He was divinely self-recognizing himself in the case of every being. And so he wasn't relating on the same basis as egos tend to relate to one another, which is what allowed for, just to even be able to witness how he was with beings in 1976 is such a profound form of instruction. There was nothing like the capability that he describes of his own process of being on the beach and writing anything that arose, not making a judgment about it, good or bad. He just wrote it. He didn't make a judgment about it. Anything came up. There was no trying to make a judgment about it. That same capability within his own process was demonstrated in the context of every single one that came into contact with him.
Yes.
Look at the ones that did come around him. I hear devotees speaking about one another in a way that's, incredible. And we've all experienced some aspect of one another. His capability for not just tolerance of that, but of staying in the room with it, staying in relationship with it to the point where it becomes, like he describes himself in the mental institution, completely subjectively combined with whoever it was that he was with, reflecting the madness of it to the point with such divine humor. That utter capability was such a, you don't see that demonstrated in this world. That is, it's so deeply attractive. And then to place a copyright on that so that, or to edit it in any way, shape, or form, to somehow, no, that was for us. And, as if that can't be experienced, or the lessons and all the mistakes you all made can't be learned and observed and learned from the next generation. It makes no sense. There's so much wisdom that was gained from all of your mistakes. Beauty, there's so much love within that, and tolerance and growth that is potential with, just let it be.
Yes, yes. Well, two things that you're speaking about there that I feel is the importance of his life demonstration always being the divine self-revelation of how the process will unfold and is as it is. And I remember an avatar discourse where he's Nadikanta read from the knee of listening. And Beloved was addressing aspects of his process. And of course, the primary was his incarnation born in and as the bride, and how it unfolded through his, his early years and the sadhana years learning, and Frank, all the way to divine translation, and even post Mahasamadhi, he was addressed the whole spectrum, so that everything would be addressed, and indicating that he wanted people to speak, engage that with him. And then he had to end up saying, do you realize that nobody responded? Nobody responded to him. In the avatar discourses at the end, they wanted to ask questions about themselves.
Oh, right.
Rather than actually listening to what he was saying about his demonstration,
Right.
his demonstration is the key.
Yeah.
Even more important than what he writes about. It's not different then, but all of the vast amount, volumes and volumes of literary artwork, that he gave in conjunction with what he coincided with. Look at me, observe this Leela, and the living Leela of that freedom, that free manifestation, utterly priorly pure, the purity in it.
Yeah.
Of his untethered, the horse in the wild is always already the case, the untethered, unbridled nature of his manifestation, fearlessness in that egolessness, commitment and certainty of the description of the heart impulse, the certainty of the native state of being.
Yeah.
That was constantly his demonstration. And then on the flip side of it is the ego act is only locked in fear, and the schism that creates,
Self-consciousness.
tension, in consciousness, yes.
Well, self-consciousness.
Unable to recognize.
Right.
So the Leela, the radical understanding of the nature of that ego act is equally as important as that revelation of the bright divine context and position. And it's wed as one, that radical understanding, consciousness and arising. And so I'm thinking back, like you're speaking about 1976. And I remember, I think I might have said this to you, how very early on, the first thing that I observed was this matter of the synchronicity relative to whatever was occurring in his intimate sphere. You would see it reverberated in life in every nuance of arising conditions, including the weather, synchronicity amongst devotees, things that we would hear about what was happening in the world. And I started writing in my diary, and I was then took on the function of every day writing these things out in detail. And that included all of the manners, the wild, free ways in which he was submitting to reflect us to ourselves, very intimately and humanly instructing us. Like I described to you how he had devotional groups with us. He did the emotional sexual reality consideration with us. We engaged in the experimentation relative to what is sought after, what's taboo, relative to money, food, and sex, everything he engaged with us. That was heroic. That was Orpheum. That was him entering into this situation and then confessing, and he could not look back because he couldn't compromise the integrity of what's required for the process for the sake of attachment or relatedness or familiarity or any sense of patterning that even brought him into manifestation. But at that point in time, one of the things that smacked us really early on was that this is not acceptable in the world for him to work this way. And so immediately he was threatened. The gathering was threatened by the world, by legal cases, by people who were upset that they had agreed to something that they had then became threatening in relationship to beloved and us. And we suffered those kinds of blows all throughout the years of his work, and even still do to this present day. And reason I'm bringing this up is that a lot of what was actually recorded was destroyed. My diaries were destroyed. Artwork that I did, like talk about you enjoying dressing the Barbie dolls. Well, when I first arrived, having been a Playboy centerfold, one of the first things that I did for Beloved was, well, relative to artwork. I've told this story, so I don't need to repeat it, but how I actually burned my portfolio. Some of it still survived outside of what I brought, but I burned my portfolio because he told me that my work was a reflection of egoic psychosis. It was all self-possessed. So I said, it should be burned. And so then I was dutifully got the message, do as the master says. This is a traditional admonition. And so I thought, okay, he said, burn it. So I marched out and I burned it. And he was like, you took it too far. You should have asked me before you were actually going to go out to do that. I would have said no. Mm-hmm. But then what happened is that I had decided that I wanted to duplicate what was done for me as a Playboy centerfold to present to Beloved a number of ladies in that form to create, a beautiful iconographic form of the differences, because this is what I was being taught relative to the manifestation of the she, that the women that as iconographic patterns or aspects of manifest form show different signs relative to the reverberations of color and light, the rainbow forms and all of that. And I was just immersed in the beautiful nature of how this could manifest. So I took each one of Beloved's intimates, which now it had become 9, and I actually did artistically created installation art rooms and forms and made huge, like with River, for example, made it really huge. I painted like a wall of a kind of a Native American Indian kind of primal form of shape, just colors. I think it was red, black, and white, and had her press herself up against it as she was naked and just wearing moccasins, and I did something different for each woman. And then I also photographed their vaginas, because the vagina themselves, manifests differently for each woman. And obviously then that has iconographic significance without taboo associated with it. And then I presented these, each of the women presented these to Beloved, and it was a beautiful thing, uninhibited, beautiful thing to do. And I was so happy as an artist and as someone uninhibited relative to being seen, that the female form and the form all of itself was beautiful. And I saw him express that and appreciate the beauty, not an exploitation of it. It was not that in any way, shape, or form, right. Not at all. And he was healing me also and purifying how, as a Playboy centerfold, that was what was happening to me. He rescued me from that, literally entered my life and pulled me out of that boredom, which I was going down full steam ahead. And I won't get into the details of that now, but and that's how he embraced me, was through my showing him my Playboy centerfold, which he had already entered me prior to that actually happening. But then what happened is the gathering was threatened. I don't even remember who it was, because I wasn't that aware of the legalities and the men and the women responsible in the hierarchy, because I was new. I wasn't aware of all these nuances, but at some point I was aware, without even asking me, all of that was burned. It was destroyed. So none of that exists. So throughout time, there's stuff that devotees felt that they should burn or get rid of or hide, work that was done in relationship to Beloved, gifted to him or he participated in, that would be considered taboo. And yet what Beloved said about that act of fear presuming that he had to be protected as if he was doing something that was wrong,
Right.
yet was also just a reflection of our impulses and desires that were either beautiful or not. It was a full spectrum, that he was then targeted for that. He was made the scapegoat by our not championing the integrity and the purity of his person and why he was working the way that he was.
Wow.
And I'm telling you this because this, from 1976 through the time that we ended up attempting to go to Hawaii, when he said, I can only work with a few now. I can't work broadly with anybody who walks off the street, because why? He would be scapegoated. So this is the pattern of why you see things being clamped down. It's fear. It's overprotection. It's still a sense of taboo. It's still locking the whole thing down as if there is something that we have to be afraid of relative to the manner in which Beloved worked, and that something is taboo about the radical nature and the fierceness of his criticism of egoity. Not acceptable.
Yeah.
Can't say that. Remember him doing that in the discourse?
Yes.
Oops, can't say that.
Yeah.
I'm a New Yorker, sorry. I mean, even in the outshining brightness, indifference, revelation time, he was still saying, sorry, I'm a New Yorker.
Yeah.
He wasn't pretending to be anything.
Right.
He wasn't wearing a costume. He was entirely naked.
Yeah.
So this just explains, I'm saying this because it explains, it doesn't justify, but it explains the pathology or the repeating patterns that are based on fear of, and that occurs through identification with what is being called content or case, which is actually the dramatization of the ego.
It's an objectification of the mind.
Yeah.
If there's no mind, none of that arises.
Not in the bright condition
Not in the
itself,
darkness. No.
but in recognition, recognition is the right relationship to what does arise and will continue to arise inevitably beyond waking, dreaming, sleeping, and death. Because there will always be permutations and modifications of the inherent brilliance of the divine self position as conscious being. Always.
But it doesn't have any power to it just arises and then it passes. It arises and it passes. It arises and it passes. It's not something that there isn't the capability to have it have any real power in and of itself because of the inherent locatedness of what is prior being the position in which it's just
Exactly, and that's the maturing process that he says where energy and attention is free, so it's non-binding.
non-binding. That's the word.
Non-binding, yes.
Motiveless, non-binding.
Yeah. So this is why I love speaking with you and participating with you, Pauline.
Yeah.
I cannot express the gratitude, for your devotion and your process with Beloved and your sharing with me, your direct relationship.
Well,
and how
it's permission. It always feels like permission with you, the same way that it felt like permission with Beloved to be expanded and without taboos, without limitation, without any presumption of problem, without rules, without a sense of needing to be strategic for fear of ... There's so much, it's pleasurable. You are, it's pleasurable. And I really appreciate it. There's a freedom in it. There's a real freedom in it that I only wish most, if not all, beings could enter into through real instrumentality.
It must manifest. And what he established here as that is irrevocable.
Yeah.
irrevocable, was the purpose of his incarnation, to bring this to consciousness,
Yeah.
conscious awareness, feeling awareness.
All right, let's tell some leelas and show some.
Yay! You want me to- I'll just show you
Just
the
do
difference.
one. Just do
I'll
one.
show you the- yeah.
Yeah.
So this is, I'm just going to show you the just the gold necklace that I told you about, since we already spoke about it. But so this was the first gift that he gave me, that was the clothing, the sacred
Palm Springs.
Palm Springs. Yes, yeah.
So what was
And
the
so
year?
this was 1976.
1976. Okay, because earlier you had said 1986, but I think that was an error.
Oh no, 1976.
Okay,
This is just shortly after I arrived.
yes, that's what
And of course, if we had access to the archives, there is, all of this is recorded, you know, so it would be corroborated. But if, I unfortunately have heard that the archives have been messed with too. And again, you could say, oh, well, what does it matter? You know, there's no history, there's no stories. It doesn't, well, this is the divine Leela that's being messed with, you see. So it's not okay. Anyway, so now one of the things that was revealed to me in the midst of the very early considerations in 1976 had to do with the symbols of the reverberating light, you know, that we were talking about earlier, relative to what does the square mean? What does the triangle mean? What do the colors in the mandala mean? What are the reverberations of the, you know, red, yellow realm, and the, you know, are you in the purple circle? You know, what are the shapes and forms that go, like, we were mapping all this out, you know, and it was really ecstatic, you know, to do this. It was so pleasurably enjoyable,
Yeah.
you know, and free and investigation, you know, and so the triangle form, you know, as the female form.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so this is pounded gold.
Beautiful.
They're very, very, very fine.
Did a
This
devotee
sliver.
make it?
No, this is actually one that was got in Palm Springs.
Oh, he actually bought it in Palm Springs. Wow.
Yes, yes. So as you can see, it's a beautiful gold necklace that is actually has the shape, the, you know, an iconographic form of the triangle. And depending upon how you place or look at the triangle, it actually means something different. You see, so you've got, and this is the with the triangle at the base. It's also a yoni with the tip. Yeah. And then also you get the triangle, which is the, you know, the gross sum of it. Yeah, it's the reverse of it.
Yeah.
So there's this is a beautiful piece, and this is where he then we had an evening out, you know, and I had a beautiful like pantsuit, you know, that I wore, and I had never ever experienced being appreciated as a woman. You know, and knowing, I won't go into the details, but knowing the history of my sense of self as a sexual being, I was never respected or adorned or seen or felt or appreciated in the manner that he so respectfully did so, you know, with such delicacy and such tenderness and delight, you know. And also those around him, except for, you know, a few that obviously were dealing with whatever was being dealt with, they participated in it. So that even magnified it, because it wasn't just about me. It was so beyond me that I was just in the bhava of his being.
Yeah.
You know, and this is when he at Palm Springs, he one evening, when we would gather with him, and we were making use of marijuana, as one of the initiatory forms of intoxicants that also was opening and revealing and allowed these things to be passed into beyond just a sense of identity with the gross persona. I walked into the room where he was sitting with a lot of devotees, and as I walked into the room, he called me over to him to sit on his lap.
Mm.
And then this is when he said to me, "All the world has come to me at last."
Really?
Mm.
Wow.
And then I put my head on his chest and I fell into his heart, like utterly, and just the heartbeat. The vaporous softness and the sweetness of love bliss, permeating his being and enveloping, and just in that, and then even the heartbeat comes to rest.
You know what's so interesting is that out of nowhere, just I think it was this weekend, that phrase, I heard that phrase in my head. This has happened to me since I was very young. The very first time I read a book that made me want to find my guru was by Swami Vivekananda, and it was on Raja Yoga. And I heard, I don't know, I was walking home and I heard in my head this phrase, "I am that I am," or that phrase. And then a day later, I'm reading the book and I see that phrase. This phrase that you just said this weekend, it just came to me. And I heard it in the form of a chant that Tamarind had done to a poem that he wrote. He ended up writing that phrase into one of his poems.
Mm.
Are you familiar with that poem?
The world, about the world.
Well, the last sentence is, say it again.
The world has come to me at last.
Yeah. So that ends up being the last sentence in this particular poem. And there was something I was hearing it out of nowhere. I haven't heard that. I haven't heard it for a decade, more than a decade. And it just came to me.
Okay.
Literally a day or two ago, that sentence.
There you go. Yeah.
Beautiful.
And that thread of the world, and I reminded him at one point in time, in late 90s, that he had said that to me, and he said to me, "When you write about your relationship to me and the Leela of it, be sure to tell everyone that I said that to you."
Yeah.
And that thread was always something that he wanted me to make sure that how he related to the world, and the Shia's mind is about that.
Yeah.
And the Quandramama time, when you ask a lot about that relative to what happened when he wanted to reinitiate Sukha Purnadikanta and I as the order, 1996, that was also when he revealed the world falls out of my right hand.
Yeah.
My right hand is the world.
Yeah.
That poem. Well, he also gave me the same kind of a direct revelation another time when I was sitting right next to him on his right side.
Wow.
And I was describing to him the process of falling into him in his heart on the right, and then what it was when the turning out happens and the worlds manifest, and that pivot of attention.
Yeah.
So, these are esoteric secrets that are not abstracted. They're actually given as initiatory gifts, and they are never forgotten.
Right.
They're never forgotten. And it's not about a separate self. It's a divine self-revelation about the nature of being and how everyone and everything is arising, merely arising, as in merely present. I am merely present. Everyone and everything is merely arising, simply arising, spontaneously, priorly. So it is necessarily artfully this pleasure dome engaged. this pleasure dome process of the revelation and radical understanding. It isn't an annihilation of an entity, because the ego is not an entity.
Right.
It's an activity that is the illusion. The separate self is the illusion. This is recognized. This isn't an illusion in the sense that it doesn't exist. It is existence, capital E. It's self.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. Will you put it on?
So this is one of the ones that he gave back to me, and
Will you put it on?
in the Donda.
I just
know.
want to dress the doll.
Yeah. So he gave this to me. And, yeah, this is, I mean, even just putting it on, the saturation, and brings a well, of his bliss and the feeling of his being, it's implanted, put it's yeah. He also gave me a little later on, he gave me a little earring to wear with these that I also still have. Actually, a couple of them. That was one of the things that, yeah, and everyone always delighted in this, because as he indicated, that Guru Kula, or what he did with those most intimate, to enjoy that participation, not as an other process.
Right.
And yet to be objectified in that process, that created a lot of drama around him, like objectifying or being objectified, attention being riveted in identification in the I other dynamic, or attention being given to one as an other, which, because of my addiction for attention, getting attention, being attention, is that I have suffered that, and that's where puja, real puja, allowed me to go beyond being visible and being just participatory in the process, the sacred process of the acknowledgement and the installation, the recognition of always present. This condition is the always present reality within which the puja is done. It's
Right.
not like you're invoking it as if it's absent. Invocation is a recognition and acknowledgement of the context, and you just go suddenly causal purifications and the recognition of the truth of the space itself. That's true puja, and you're not visible in that as a separate other. You're fully transparent in the participation in it.
Right. I think that's what the swimming pool represents. So for me, it's always been just the swimming pool. There haven't even ever been any bodies. I had to work hard to imagine the bodies. Yeah. And that's been the context of my experience in general, is beloved is so present as the prior condition from the beginning, that all of this play is happening in the context, but it's just an arising.
Yes.
Like even with you and I, there's no objectification of you, because he is so absolutely self-evident.
Yes. And I recognize that in you. And I recognize that in relationship to everyone and everything. And also then can understand the foibles, the errors that are being dramatized. And there isn't really a distinction to be made to pin you down or anyone down. But there are certain dramatizations that in one another that we have to hold one another accountable for not engaging, because it obstructs his work. And so, like, I'm not going to say to you, oh, Pauline, you really don't understand because you weren't there as long as I was. or you weren't there as close as I was for as long, or he didn't have sex with you as many times as he did with me. I'm saying that genuinely, seriously.
No, I understand. See,
Not
here's
a
what I
jot,
feel. He,
not a jot of difference.
yeah. I feel okay, so he did say something about if you only come with a thimble, that's all I can put into the thimble. So I'm only going to be able to fill the thimble. But like somehow in the small span of time that I was intimate with him, he just the entire, and it just keeps going and going and going and going. So I'm not jealous. There's nothing to be jealous about.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And I can
Jealousy
dig it, like,
may
I
arise.
love
All
it.
of the emotions may arise, and that's not taboo or to be, to dismiss even. It's just,
Yeah.
it's can be humor about the cartoon nature of it.
Yeah, I mean, I was very so for example, when I was first a devotee, I was very open and confessed about how, there was some sadness I had about the fact that that I hadn't been born into the community. Just not
Right.
even, just to be like, look at the blessing these beings have had to be able to grow up in the company of this being, let alone his daughters. I was like, I was blown away by the magnificent opportunity those beings had to be brought up by him directly, so intimately. And like there was some part of me that longed for that, that he would have mastered my life as my father, right? There was, how could one not? That ended up like being used against me, as if there was like, because of the fact that I had confessed openly, there was no jealousy about it, but it was an open kind of appreciation for what they had, and that it's like, wow, I didn't have that. I'm so like, there's like I'm enamored a little bit by the possibility of, now that being what it is, when you grow up in that circumstance, it's a very different vantage point, right? So was I seeing things through rose-colored glasses? Was I seeing things romantically? Was I like projecting some kind of illusion onto that circumstance, to use your phrase, objectifying it maybe a certain way and imagining that it was somehow better than any other circumstance? All I knew was darshan. All I knew was what it was like to be in his company, and just the overwhelming love and love bliss. And for me to experience that just for 15 minutes, and to imagine growing up in that circumstance and what that must be like. That being said, I didn't have the same vantage point. So only by getting to know the daughters did I start to appreciate what it was actually like, and some of the realities associated with growing up in that circumstance, and some of the, and the positives and the negatives associated with any circumstance, including that circumstance.
Yeah.
So did I begin to be disillusioned? Yes. And I became increasingly compassionate for that circumstance and the challenges associated with it, as well as comprehending fundamentally that there, on some very basic level, there was zero difference between the circumstance I was brought up in and the circumstance that they were brought up in terms of the actual limitations that still needed to be overcome in either side of, right?
Yeah. Well, as beloved says, the advantage will only be able to be an actual advantage depending upon the disposition and the impulse of the being.
Right. So I understand what you mean when you say to be objectified, because I can comprehend how they felt too, feeling objectified even from an outsider's perspective, and having all kinds of projections placed on them regarding, what that must have been like.
Yes.
Without any real, without an opportunity for the real conversation to even happen. So there's either this weird objectification, or there's the insular, inside the bubble reality.
Yeah.
And moving in between those two, you know what I mean? It's like it's one or the I can
Yes, and
only
being objectified, also, like I indicated, is well, to liken it to somebody who's famous.
right.
You've got the paparazzi, you've got people assuming they know you, they draw conclusions, they have
Right.
no sense of the reality of your
Wow.
circumstance.
Yeah.
Like, bless his heart, Raj recently, an ordeal of being involved with a man who has good intentions, or Brad Reynolds, a lot of people who I have had very little history with, and yet there's an assumption that they know me and they can make a total summary evaluation of my life and process, and they're slot me into making a judgment about
Right.
whatever.
Well,
And I
that seems to be happening a lot for the both of us now.
yeah, like, you don't know me.
Right.
And I'm not doing that with you. I'm not making an evaluation of your entire life and process and relationship to beloved. I'm only indicating that there are certain errors that are being dramatized here. That is a collective error. We all have different ways that we do this, and we have to stop relating to one another upon that basis. When we were around beloved, like particularly having been like the daughters, and the past associations with his vehicles of incarnation with Ramakrishna Vivekananda and other forms of incarnations that correspond with the divine process unfolding through apparent time and space. We're all connected in that regard.
Right.
Everyone and everything is, but then with his unique manifestation relative to his embodiment as the culminating divine self-revelation, he describes certain character personas and combining of patterns that were part of that passageway, part of that manifestation. And so with the daughters, so with the four Kanyas, and as you can imagine, throughout time we were given names, we were given titles, we were initiated into orders, they were broken apart, they were exploded, it all changed. We changed costumes constantly, as did he. And yet everybody's watching this, and so there are expectations being placed upon and assumptions of knowledge that are just like completely not relevant to understanding anything remotely about what we experienced.
Right.
Even so much so, as I think I might have mentioned, when I moved up to where I'm living now, where there's a gathering or group of devotees within large numbers around in the area, it's very disparate. There's not really a culture here. But I was involved with one devotee here who, in my trying to communicate about the errors that I'm observing based upon profound process and history of this direct relationship, she says, "How dare you criticize my family?" As the Guru Kula principle. Devotees are my family. You're criticizing my family. That stopped my mind. You don't have any idea what living in the Guru's house as his family is like, and you're telling me this? I mean, it's like the kind of presumptuousness that people have, because I'm not wearing a costume. I'm not wearing the Guru Kula costume anymore. And I've even asked that I don't even want to be included in that kind of assumption, because even the notion of Guru Kula was dramatized with errors associated with it. So it's like it's to the radical nature of it is inclusive of the full spectrum of the dramatization of egoity. And they need to be addressed. It's not okay that we relate to one another with such superficiality and presumptuousness.
Well, also, what I don't understand is like the freedom that the process necessitates. You can't even stop that level of criticism at a certain point, because if it's the truth, it's just like it's as plain as day.
That's right. That's what's so surreal about it. And then I immediately hear, no matter what arises, the discipline is radical devotion to truth itself. So there's no justification, no matter how offensive it is. But does that mean I shut up and become passively silent? No, I can't.
No. It's no more no than it is yes. I mean, it's like, it's not.
No,
that's more right. Important than yes. It is what it is.
By his intervention, you know, it's the Leela, it's the continuing Leela
Yeah.
that is all inclusive. And we need
You'll
to do
shut
that.
up when it stops being the case.
Yeah, no, and that is true when, you know, if there was something that was taken responsibility for, beloved didn't have to address it anymore.
Right.
And there were many moments, many times in which that occurred. And that was sublime, sublime celebration that would occur in satsang as a sangha by virtue of a right response. It wasn't that the past was ever bereft of that. It was just insufficient, you know, at the time of his samadhi and mahasamadhi. And then, as he said, you know, Orpheus couldn't look back. Like he had to keep steadfast. Beloved had to keep steadfast. This is not it, not it. Insufficient. Lesson, learn, address, understand the limits. That's the only way you can fully allow this magnification of the bright to occur, and the perfect practice can be stabilized. That's been obvious to me since 1986. And did that mean that I didn't ever dramatize, or that I didn't have to go through lessons, or that wasn't purification? No, that never ends. And ever, because the even as beloved speaks about, when you actually understand how he describes the actual beginning of the 7th stage process, most fully realized, is transfiguration, transformation, indifference, and outshining. That's when the way really begins. And when he said to me at Nukambadi Island, he said, when you begin the 7th stage process, it's going to feel like you're starting all over again. Readdressing everything,
Right.
from most perfect recognition, responsive devotion, not as an independent realizer, no, egoist participation in realization itself, as the realizer is the realization. And that's dependent upon, paradoxically dependent upon, a right relationship to the realizer and the gifts that he's given in manifest form. It's not an abstracted process or a dissociated process in relationship to what arises. It's right action, which is what you're pointing to and have been sharing.
Well,
So
something I literally right before we started, I was just looking at I guess it's titled The Perfect Way, summarizing. But this is what he says. He says, therefore, every apparent action of my any and every such true devotee is based upon the root apprehension of prior unity. And because of this, my any and every such devotee is, as and by means of his or every action, his or her every action, sent by me to be a unifier in the world.
beautiful, beautiful. Prior unity, unifier. Love itself, love bliss itself. Nice. Mm. I so wish we would just have worldwide sit-ins, just with everyone, everyone,
Yeah.
no distinction. Anyway, okay. Oh, Pauline, I love you so much.
Love you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Love to James.
Okay.
Bye.